Welcome to Cultural Conversations with the Mississippi State University Libraries. I'm your host, Fred Smith. My guest today is David Nolan, Associate Editor. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you, Fred. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's always nice to be invited back. Even so.
We were having such a good conversation about the Ulysses S. Grant memoirs that we didn't get to but about half of what we wanted to talk about. So we basically covered the early history and how it was written and some of that, but we didn't get to the new edition that we wanted to talk about. Are there a lot of first editions around of the Grant memoirs? Is it fairly common?
Well, yeah, because one of the things that we talked about at the end of the last time was that it was just such a wildly popular title. And so, I think a majority of households in America in that era probably bought a copy of that first edition. And so this is something that we always joke with people about, and I think you as a rare books guy would appreciate this. The prevalence of first editions sometimes makes people think they have a real find, when actually they've just found something that's relatively common, because a lot of those have survived up until now.
And they seem to have been fairly well made, except for the ones that were in leather that, due to climate, probably didn't last. But so it does show up quite a bit. Now there have been a bunch of different printings of that.
Yes.
Because I've seen hardbacks, paperbacks. Has it been in print continuously since it came out?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, there was the first edition, was a big seller, and that was 1885 and 1886. And then about 10 years later, there was a second edition that was issued. And then since then, there have just been numerous editions by numerous different publishers, even up to sort of the modern era with Library of America edition and Penguin annotated editions and things like that.
Have there been any changes in the text throughout those editions?
So for the most part, each edition has sort of gone with that first published edition as kind of the base text. There was some listing of errors, typesetting errors and printing errors in that most subsequent editions have corrected. But for the most part, that edition has...
Same edition.
Yeah.
What made y'all decide that there might be a need for a new edition?
Well, so this is a great question, because every time you embark on a big project like this, you sort of ask yourself why. Why are we doing this? Why is this necessary at this point? Especially, with the Library of America edition being widely available, the Penguin edition, and those have good notes in them. But I have a copy here of our edition that is a 2017 publication by Harvard University Press. And there's actually a passage in chapter 10 that I want to read that just kind of illustrates sort of our motivation for doing this new edition. So in chapter 10, Grant is talking here about the Mexican-American War and his involvement there as a young soldier. And he's talking about the approach that the American Army was making as they were moving toward Mexico City. And so he wrote this statement talking about the recon work that was done in the lead up to that attack on Mexico City. And he wrote, "These reconnaissances were made under the supervision of Captain Robert E. Lee, assisted by Lieutenants P.G.T. Beauregard, Isaac I. Stevens, Z.B. Tower, G.W. Smith, George B. McClellan, and J.G. Foster of the Corps of Engineers, all officers who attained rank and fame on one side or the other in the great conflict for the preservation of the unity of the nation." So the reader in 1885 and 1886, as they read that passage, they're going to be intimately familiar with the history of the Civil War and who all of these people are that Grant's mentioning.
And about half of those are household names now, and the rest of them completely forgotten.
Exactly. Well, that's what, when we do a speaking event, I like to read this sentence and I like to say to the crowd, okay, how many of you recognized at least one of those names? Well, most everybody raises their hand. And I say, okay, how many of you recognized almost all of those names? And hands go down. I say, how many of you recognize every single one of those names? Usually there's one smart
Have you
aleck.
ever gotten somebody?
Yeah, there's usually one smart aleck in the crowd that keeps his hand up there.
Prove
but-
it. Tell me
Yeah,
who this was.
For the most part, people are unfamiliar with these names.
Beauregard, you know, and a
Right.
few of them, but you know, most of
ZB
them.
Tower,
Never heard
he's
of
sort
him.
of fallen out of popular memory there. And so what we wanted to do was go in and make this text more accessible to a modern reader. So what we have done is we have gone in and we have added a footnote annotation where as you're reading this, as a reader in the 21st century, you can look at these names and say, okay, who's that? Well, you can glance down at the footnote and get a succinct biography, why that person would have been famous at that moment that Grant was mentioning them, because a lot of these guys went on to do other things after the Civil War and were still very much in the public eye. And so it gives you sort of that same cultural context that the reader of the first edition would have had that's been a little bit lost to us all these years later. So,
Well, how did you pick exactly what needed to be annotated?
no, yeah, this is a good question because the editor spent a good bit of time sort of wrestling with this and thinking about, you know, there are lots of things that as you go through you say, oh, that's interesting, we should put a note here about that. But what we ended up doing was we started to kind of use the premise that we weren't going to annotate anything someone could just Google. So if it was easily findable, if it was just a definition, something like that, we decided not to put an annotation because we wanted this to be about Grant's text and sort of his wonderful storytelling, not about all of our notes that we were adding along the way. And so the idea there was we limited ourselves to people that he's mentioning. We wanted to provide a brief identification. Also places, if that place no longer exists, especially. You know, and the course of the Mississippi River has shifted many times since the events of the Vicksburg campaign. And so there are a lot of little towns and landmarks that Grant mentions that
Aren't there anymore?
Yeah, are unknown to us at this point in time. And then any places where Grant was incorrect in his facts or was vague about some of the details, we tried to just add an annotation to clarify that so that we just provide a brief interruption that then you can go right back to reading Grant's text and really enjoying his text there. So.
Did you find places where he made errors?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, the memoirs have always, memoir in general is controversial as far as the factual basis of it, right? Because people tend to, when they're writing their memoirs, amplify things or downplay things according to what best sort of benefits them. But what we found with Grant is that actually there were very few factual errors. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he had his sons and had other assistants who were actually digging into the correspondence and the official reports and things like that, what became what we know now as the official records of the War of the Rebellion. He had them digging into that to verify a lot of the facts that he was presenting. And so that makes for a very accurate text.
Do you have any idea how many annotations y'all have actually made?
So at one point we counted, just for
Of course.
just for our
I
own
thought you probably had.
purposes there, and it's roughly 2,060 annotations that we added to the text. And so in all of those you will find some sort of interesting nugget about what Grant is describing there. So,
How many years did that take?
So I started work on the project in 2013, but the project had been going since about 2012, and then we finally saw the finished product in October of 2017 was when it actually came out. I like to joke that my middle daughter was a newborn when we started, and then she was getting close to inner kindergarten by the time we finished up. So that's kind of the trajectory that we've been on with this.
Slow process, but it was a 2-volume set, and there was a lot to it. So,
Exactly.
How did you find a publisher for y'all's new edition?
Well, so Dr. Marzalak really was sort of spearheading that effort as the executive director and managing editor of the project. But he, was able to sort of take this idea out to different publishers, and Harvard University Press really sort of came back and said, we understand the value of this project. We want to get on board with this. We understand that this is something that is valuable and we can promote, and we think there's a real audience for this. And so that really, was a great opportunity for us to be able to.
Promotion is a key to selling books, and
exactly.
You couldn't have found a better publisher than Harvard. I mean, that's when you're talking about prestigious university presses.
Exactly.
They are as good as it gets.
Well, they were great to work with at every stage of the game, so to speak, and so.
Well, was Grant a good writer?
It's interesting. When I first started, I really didn't know much about the memoirs, right? And if you just say 19th century memoirs to someone, I think, for the most part, certain negative connotations come up in the mind there. And I think I was astounded when I really started diving into the text to find just what a great storyteller he really was. And this is something that people in Grant's day often remarked upon, is this idea that he was very quiet, he was very sort of shy almost as sort of a personality and a persona. But if he were in a context where he was comfortable and people could get him to start talking about his experiences, everyone found him to be a very engaging storyteller. And that's really what comes across in the memoirs, is Grant the storyteller. He uses a lot of self-deprecating humor. He talks about what he saw and what he experienced and his emotions going through different moments in the war and things like that. And so it's a very engaging read. You kind of get the feel that he's sort of sitting across the coffee table from you in your living room telling you about his experiences in the war. And so it's a very well done memoir.
How have your sales been?
They have been outstanding. We have been very pleased with the response. I think we've sold about 12,000 copies at this stage, and that is really out of this world for an academic
University
book like
press
this.
book.
Right.
How many printings so far? I know it's gone out of first edition to.
Yes. So I think the last I checked, we were on either the fourth or fifth printing, and so that's an exciting thing for us. And it's also available now in paperback.
When did that come out?
That came out in June of 2019. So.
How have the sales been on that?
So far, so good from what we can tell. So,
what are the prices on the books?
So the hardback is $42, and the softback is about $20 in that range. So
that's quite a bargain for what was really a 2-volume. I don't know how you crammed 2 volumes into one with all these annotations, but you did.
Exactly.
So. Well, thanks for sharing all of that with us. I really appreciate it, David, and it's a fascinating story, and we'll have you back for some more.
Sounds great.
Thank you for watching Cultural Conversation, and thank you, David Nolan, my guest.